Hello, where are my speakers? Please come up. Cynthia Maller. She's Global Creative Director of PayPal. Susan Hoffman, Executive Creative Director at Wieden Kennedy. Margaret Johnson, Executive Creative Director and Associate Partner at Goodby, Silverstein and Partners. Well, it's an honor to be here. I'm going to ask a few questions and then open it up to the floor. I'm sure that you have a lot of things that you want to ask as well. I want to start with 4 quotes that sort of frame, I think, a lot of things that you might be thinking about. First quote: women have to operate in a narrower emotional challenge than men. Sally Krawcheck, CEO, Merrill Lynch, previously. I always key in 11 or 222 or 333 on the microwave, rather than 100, 200, or 300 because hitting the same number saves time. Cara Owen, British Foreign and Commonwealth Officer, and she heads diversity. You've read this one, I'm sure. I was sipping champagne at President and Mrs. Obama's reception. I was mingling with foreign dignitaries, and suddenly I started to think about my 14-year-old son. He was disruptive in class. He was failing math. A colleague walked up to me and said, "Are you okay?" I told her, when this is over, I'm going to go home and write an op-ed titled, "Women Can't Have It All." Anne Marie Slaughter. The last quote: girls are much too sensitive and sweet to be in the advertising business. My mother. So here we are, some very renowned ladies sitting here behind me. I have some questions to ask you, and I'll just let you jump in one after the other. The first question is, did you always want to go into this business, or did you fall into it by accident? What was the allure?
Well, first off, my mother said I wasn't smart enough to be in advertising. So, can you hear me? So I think that was an actual huge challenge for me. I needed people not to believe in me, and that gave me the strength to do what I wanted. And I just fell into advertising. I didn't like school, and I went to some not very good colleges, a junior college that was all about tie-dyeing and sewing. Then I went to a university, and I needed to take something art, and there was only one thing called commercial art, so I took that, and then I quit college and went and worked, and I think I needed to work, but I worked up. I always wanted to do this thing called commercial art. That's how long ago it was. It wasn't even called advertising. So I always had that little bug from that class, so I'm glad I found that little path.
I fell into it as well, pretty hard. I actually wanted to be an astrophysicist. Wow. And
wow.
It's too bad because I would have been a goddess. I just wasn't good enough in math, and I didn't think that mattered when I applied to MIT. I thought they're just going to see beyond that. They didn't. And then I had to kind of actually be told by some people that knew me well, you know, Cynthia, you have this way of looking at the world, you're a good writer, or whatever that means. And I think that you would be really good in this thing called advertising. And I remember thinking, well, I really like reading magazines. So I ended up going to one of the best schools you could go to, and it wasn't until I was halfway through that I realized what I was studying. And it was the right choice, but I don't know, kismet is something very strange.
Same question. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and I was always really into art, so photography, sculpture, you name it, I was into it. Theater, I love travel. And I think when I went to college, I was in the journalism school at the University of North Carolina. And when I found out that, like, that's basically what advertising is. Like, you get to travel and you get to experience all of this, like, amazing art, and they pay you for it, which is amazing. I was like, that sounds like something that I could do. So I did.
So I'll let you start with this question. What kind of commitment and sacrifice have you had to make to rise to the level you're at?
Well, I mean, sacrifice. I mean, I think if you're good at anything that you do, then there's a certain amount of sacrifice that we all experience. You're gonna, you're not gonna get to go to dinner with, your friends one night, or you're gonna miss the school play, or you're not gonna get to do the field trip with your kid that you really want to do. But I think that's part of being committed to something that you really love doing. I have an early story, actually, from when I first was getting into this. I took a summer school class at Parsons School of Design in New York, and I decided, okay, this is like really, it's pretty awesome. I'm in the art world. I'm putting together like some advertising pieces that I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So how am I going to do this as a career? And because I was like from this tiny town, I didn't know anyone in advertising. I didn't have any connections or anything like that. So before I left New York, this is back in the day of Yellow Pages, I ripped out the advertising section from the Yellow Pages of the phone book in New York from a phone booth. And I put it in my little suitcase and went back to Chapel Hill. And when I got back there, I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to put a portfolio together? So I'm just going to call these agencies, and I'm going to ask them, like, where do these portfolios come from? Are they coming from Parsons? Are they coming from, I'd heard about this ad school in Atlanta. Are they coming from the Portfolio Center? So this is ridiculous that I did this, but I was committed. So I started calling these major, like, big-time agencies in New York. So think BBDO New York. Think how big that is. Phone rings, and it's me on the other end. Hey, can you connect me with someone in the creative department? And they were like, there's like 200 creatives here, probably, maybe more. Who? Just anyone. Can you connect me with anyone in the creative department? Okay, so they dropped me, I'm sure, down to the most junior person's cube. Phone rings, and I'm like, hey, if you were going to hire someone straight out of school, if you were going to look at that portfolio, would the best portfolios come from Parsons in New York, or would they come from the Portfolio Center in Atlanta? And they pretty much all said the Portfolio Center in Atlanta, and that's where I ended up going. But I literally called probably, like, I don't know, 30 or 40 ad agencies and asked the same question, because I was just determined that I wanted to go to the very best school so I could, get into this business.
Cynthia, commitments and sacrifices.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm just kidding. I'm afraid of commitment. No. I haven't made any sacrifices, I have to tell you. That's how I look at it, because I own all of my choices. Every time I missed a family event, or, I don't know, didn't forge a deeper friendship, or because I was at work, that was my choice. And it's because I am somewhat of an ad animal. I have an animal-like instinct to do what I do. So the commitment part for me is not something that I can control. It's just there. I'm not ambitious, funny enough, but I'm extremely competitive. In the running world, I'm what they call a rabbit. If I run on my own, I can probably do, like, I don't know, an 8-minute mile. If you put somebody in front of me, now I've got a 7-minute mile. And so commitment to me just means to make sure that I'm true to myself, that I don't try to put the brakes on what's going on in my passion. And I realize that you can say, well, if you work that hard, that certain things are going to fall by the wayside. But I love my life, and I love being in this business, so I don't see it as missing anything. So,
Susan?
Well, I'd say the same thing, but I was going to start it differently. I've made a lot of sacrifices, but I did them because I was always careful that I never neglected my family. I always had a good balance with the partner. My kids were never left in the closet or homeless or anything. and they're not in therapy yet. But, you know, it's a weird thing to say. I'm like you. I'm a bit of an ad rat. I mean, I really like the business. And so, I mean, there were times that I'm sure a lot of women would say, really? But I went back to Amsterdam a few times and ran that office. And one time I literally was commuting, if you can imagine commuting from Portland, Oregon, for about a year. And the kids stayed in Portland, and I would go back and forth. And my oldest son was like, Mom, every time you came home, you were so tired. Well, no wonder, geez. But so only because I really love it. And I've actually never taken a sabbatical. And I was telling somebody the other day, because she was like, why haven't you done that? I go, because kind of my job's a sabbatical. Like, I'm so spoiled. And I don't know how many people out here feel like they're spoiled. But, you know, if you can get in the right agency and you can do the right work, it's so much fun. So that's what I'd say.
So, important question, particularly from the keynote speech that you heard earlier. Who have you been mentored by mostly, men or women?
Oh boy. I have the blessing of having both a father and a mother that, in their own unique way, are still my mentors. And I would like to name people that I've worked with and stuff, but that's really more of a short-lived thing. I'm thankful for certain men that have given me chances, and I would have to say, interestingly enough, and I'm not sure why, men have championed me and women have not. And so
this
usually,
is a problem.
Well, I have made a commitment once I got to a place where I could champion women, I do it ad nauseum. But only if they deserve it. I'm not just going to champion you because you're a woman. I champion great people with great work ethics. So both my mother and my father still, in different ways. My mother's the one that gets to listen to me when I cry, and my dad's the one that answers all of my weird questions about weird topics. So they've just, and I think I would have to say when I was, I don't know how old, they definitely made me know, for sure, you can do whatever you want to do. Like, there's no limit. And I come up from a family where I'm the only girl and I have 3 brothers, so that was pretty progressive. So I grew up kind of thinking, I can do whatever I want. It's going to be fine. So that was the best mentorship moment that they could have given me.
Well, now we're opposite. Well, my biggest mentor is Dan Wyden and David Kennedy, and that might sound weird, but I had a fine upbringing, but certainly in the age where women didn't work. So, and my dad was in construction, but I was never, ever going to go into construction. I would never have been invited. And so maybe part of that, maybe there's all this subconscious stuff that happens in our upbringing that we go down a path that we don't expect. So when I got to Wyden Kennedy, because I worked for agencies before that, and I kind of had more issues in those agencies, and I got to Wyden Kennedy, and these guys were so normal. And you know, I've never felt that being a female in the agency has been a problem. It's been very equal. But they really, they're such supporters that I think my life would not be my life without those guys. So those are my mentors.
Margaret.
So I work at Goodby Silverstein Partners, and I kind of have the same story. I pretty much grew up there. So, you know, Rich Silverstein and Jeff Goodby have been wonderful creative mentors, and they absolutely champion anyone who is doing great work. So you can be guy, girl, the guy in the parking lot that parks the cars, it doesn't matter. So I'm lucky in that way. But this is something that happened recently, and I don't even know this woman that well, but she was a wonderful mentor for me. She was a recruiter that I was talking to, like at a coffee one morning, and she was like, you know, you are super talented, but you don't have a brand. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, there are tons of guys out there that aren't, you know, anywhere near as talented as you are, but they have a brand. They're like, you know, tooting their own horn. They're on Twitter. They have their own websites. And I'm like, I left this coffee thinking, wow, why was she talking to me like that? But it really resonated with me, and it made me kind of create a brand for myself for the first time in, gosh, I mean, I've been working for, 17 years or something like that. And it's only in the last, 4 years that I've actually done that and like actively, like, kind of, I did make a website. I'm on Twitter now. Like I, try to like, represent myself better.
So
Because of her.
I think a very important question to always ask is, what is the greatest, you could use the word failure or challenge, that you've had to deal with, and how did you navigate that moment?
You want me to start? Oh, gosh. I mean, I haven't had any major the worst thing I ever did was, it was probably one of my first assignments at GSP, and a friend of Jeff Goodby's asked him he worked at KGO Radio, and he wanted to put these billboards up all over San Francisco for the 49ers games. And I was super junior at the time. I'd never done a billboard in my life. And I worked with this guy, and we were going to do these, mesh jerseys on the billboards as the backdrop, and we were going to have these letters cut out, like the, names on jerseys and things like that. So I found this seamstress in Chinatown, which was mistake number one, to create these letters. And the day of the shoot, I go to pick them up, and literally they look like they've been cut out with like hedge clippers or something. They were like strings hanging off of them. They were jagged. It was a disaster. So worked through that debacle. Jeff never knew. Created the billboards. They went up all over the city. And the day that they went up, he called me first thing in the morning. He's like, "Hey, can you come out to my office?" I'm like, "Okay." And I'm thinking he's going to give me props for these awesome billboards that I did, right? Because I fixed them. They looked killer. And he's like, let's talk about those billboards that are up all over the city. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you can't read any of the type that's on those things. I mean, and if you know him, he talks like this. He's like, that looks like itty-bitty mouse type, like the legal stuff that you see on a magazine ad. I've never seen type on a billboard that small in my entire career. And I'm sitting there. This is literally my first kind of interaction with him. And I'm like, oh, my God. I'm like, well, he's like, what do you think we should do about this? And I was like, I fix them? I don't know. Fix them? You can have my next paycheck and we can fix them. Meanwhile, my paycheck at the time probably wouldn't have paid to patch one of these billboards. So now this favor that his friend asked him to do, he is now in a situation where he's paying to patch all of these billboards, which he did, all over the city. But I guess my point is that it has like made me realize that attention to detail is super important. Craftsmanship is something that I'll carry with me, probably because of that very thing, that very event that happened, my whole career,
Yeah, mine was early on as well. I don't think karma exists, because if it did, I wouldn't be sitting up here. I wasn't very nice. Well, one of my very first assignments was to work on, at the time, what was fairly revolutionary, which was healthy frozen dinners. And the company, I knew that the company was owned by Kraft. That was the parent company. And they're called Healthy Choice. I think they still exist, despite my efforts. So I was, at my first job, I was very lucky because two men hired me and said, you don't have to be junior, we're putting you right into a regular role. And they just gave me everything to work on, and I was very lucky. So this was one of them. And so I did a bunch of concepts, and it was TV. A bunch of concepts, and I really fought from the beginning, because I didn't know any better. I fought to present my own work. I didn't know any better. And so we went through rounds and rounds and rounds, and then we got to the one that our first level client really liked. We're taking this up the line. And so, of course, I said, well, I want to present it, I want to present it, I want to present it. So we get in front of, like, the chairman of the board. It was like the last step, like just an FYI. This is just an FYI. We're just going to show the chairman of Kraft. It's like going to be a non-event. And I'm like, great. So I presented this idea, which at the time, basically, it made fun of fast food in general and positioned itself as being fast but being healthy. And the chairman looked at me, because you know how, like, when things go wrong, it's the creative's fault? And when they go right, it's the account guy's victory. So anyway, so he looks straight down the table. It's a very long table. He looks straight down the table at me. I was the only woman in the room. I think that might not have mattered. And he said, "You do know that we sell $100 million worth of cheese to McDonald's every year?" And I was like, I was deathly silent. Nobody came to my rescue. And I said, "I didn't know that. But that's pretty important." You know, we have a couple other concepts back at the agency. We'll come straight back. And he said, "I think that'd be a good idea." What happened after that was I realized it is my responsibility to know the business of my clients, because in the end, like, I'm going to be sitting there and nobody's going to take the heat. And that's okay, because it's my responsibility. So that was a huge failure. I mean, I don't know what kept me from crying, except maybe the shock and the silence. And that my father always told me, "Don't cry in front of men. It doesn't work. Don't." So that just taught me a really great lesson, which was I get a creative brief or whatever it might be, and I take it upon myself to try to learn everything I can about a client. And real quick, it works in the reverse as well. I was working at an ad agency, and we had to defend the business. And because I had researched this particular account way back to when it started, I knew that there was a personal issue between some of the agency personnel at the very top. And I knew because of that we didn't have a chance in hell of keeping that business, because it was personal between the client and the principal of our agency. And I tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. But I felt good at knowing that, and I called my headhunter and got out of there. And they did lose the account. But anyway, I think it's something, you have to be responsible for your own stuff.
Well, my biggest failure was opening our London office. I had opened the Amsterdam office, and that seemed to go fine. And then a few years later, I was asked to open London, and I think we were very naive to think that, and this is now about 12 years ago, to think that one Wyden and Kenny person and a woman could go to that market, and somebody from Portland, Oregon, who is pretty shy, and we don't really believe in PR and press. We've changed that since. So I say I went into early menopause over that job, but and I don't think Dan Wyden would agree to this statement, but I truly was fired from that office, and so that was hard for me, because I had opened up Amsterdam, was quite successful, but you know, in looking back, we had 8 people from Wyden Kennedy that actually went to Amsterdam, and in this case, in a bigger market, it was just me. So you know, there were just a lot of lessons we learned from that. And it took me a long time to kind of reprove myself to the agency, because that was kind of a black mark over me. You can ask Mel, it took me years actually. But I groveled back, and then now I'm running Portland. So it was tough. It was probably 8 years of really tough times for me emotionally to have that kind of failure. And they say you learn from them. I learned from it. I learned probably I'll never go back there and run that agency.
So let me open it up to the floor. Stand up if you would, and ask a question of anybody up here.
Oh, come on, don't be shy.
Really, not the
There's one.
Be shy.
Hello.
Hello.
I was struck when you said that more men had helped you in your careers than women, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe how you personally either helped to change that dynamic, or advice to other women in your position about how we can change that dynamic in that culture to create and foster more talent to be at the top of the food chain. Oh, I'm Elizabeth Cleveland. I'm at the Martin Agency.
Awesome. Okay, so I never really thought it was a gender issue at the time. because I was the only woman in the creative department for so long that it couldn't have been a gender issue. I just thought I was working really hard, doing good work, and I had a really good work ethic. People would notice and they would champion me. So I couldn't be championed by women in the early stage because there weren't any. And then when there started, the first female creative director I worked for, she just did everything she could to make me invisible, and she didn't know who she was dealing with. And I just remember saying to myself, as we've all said, you know, someday I'm going to make sure I don't do that or I do this. And so I said, you know, it didn't occur to me until that moment, oh, wow, she's a bitch. Can I say? Yeah, oh yeah, we can say bitch. I forgot. That's on the good list. And her partner was female. Well, I just thought, what the hell is your problem? Like, I'm here to make you look good, and you have no clue that that's actually what's going on here. You're trying to make yourself look good by stepping on me, and her partner was a woman, and I just thought, here's the thing. I'm going to champion the people that make me look good and that deserve it and that do good work, and that's what I mean by make me look good. Sorry, it sounded really weird. But I will say, and I know this is going to be controversial, so sorry, Mom, Dad. Beauty is extremely powerful. And it doesn't have to mean that you look like a model. It means that you, from the inside, feel powerful, feminine, beautiful. And I'm sorry for the few men in the room, but it's game over at that point, because they will do whatever basically you ask. And I think we don't use that enough. When that doesn't mean sleep with people, that means really own the power that you have and do what you need to do with it. And so I just made a point at that moment of saying, she doesn't get it. I'm never going to forget her. I'm going to sit at a conference someday about women, and I'm going to mention her. And I just made a commitment then to make sure that I just treat everybody equally is what I decided to do.
Next question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Rolfe, and I'm also a creative director, and I thought it was interesting because I've realized that like a lot of the women that are really high up in the industry have stayed at the same place for a long time. I was at Crispin for 10 years. Susan, you've been at Wyden obviously for a long time. Cynthia,
How
you
many years? Do you know?
You're so young, it's hard to guess.
29.
29? So I just want, it's an observation, but it's also sort of a question. Is it that we're more loyal? Are we, is that why people don't know, women's names as much, because we kind of stay? Do we find people that we feel like believe in us and then we kind of commit to that? Just wondered if you had any perspective on that, because it's something like Susan Cradle, there's a lot of them that are out there that are really the most senior in the industry, and we've all kind of been at a lot of places, or one place for a long time.
I guess we're just more stable. I just found a place that I wanted to work at. And I had actually worked with Dan and David previous to Wyden and Kennedy. And that was for about 1.5 years at William Kane. And I so loved the way they worked. And then when they broke away for Wyden and Kennedy, they couldn't afford to take me. So then I went to Chiat Day in Seattle. And I was offered a job, weirdly enough, like 1 year later from Wyden in another agency in Portland, Borders. And Borders at the time was huge and was on their way, and Wyden and Kennedy was this silly little agency. But I needed to get back with them. And that's my thing. I mean, I think if they were jerks and assholes and made it difficult for me, I wouldn't have stayed. But I just found a really good home. And Portland, Oregon, I was born and raised there. There's not many of us that were born and raised. And so that was another reason why, it was a miracle that happened for me in Portland, because everyone said, you have to go to New York, you have to go to New York. So, those are probably the two things that have kept me there.
I'm loyal to no one but myself. I had to learn that early on. You think that people are your friends, and I agree with you. If you work for people and you're getting the satisfaction and you're having fun and you're fulfilled, then you stay. But my resume, my grandmother says it makes me look really unstable. I've worked at places as short as 6 months and as long as 6.5 years. And the only thing that keeps me there is if I'm having a good time and I'm doing the work I want to do. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Same thing for me, I think. I love San Francisco. I always wanted to be in the city, so I wanted to be at the place where I could actually do the best work in this city. So I pretty much stayed at GSP the whole time. Nothing more than that. I mean, I do think at times, over the years, I've thought, gosh, maybe I should have moved around more. And most men, I think, want to accelerate faster or as fast as possible. So they're willing to, uproot everything and maybe move to a city that they don't like as much just to move up faster. But I chose to stay in one place, and I think it actually ended up working out, for me, because ultimately, I don't think I would have made it to partner had I taken a different path, because I probably wouldn't have been doing the kind of work that would have gotten me there.
We have time for one more question.
I think I have the mic.
How about the gentleman? Is that a gentleman that raised his hand? I can't tell. Lady in the back, then. Yes.
Hi, first Margaret, go Heels. I'm wondering, Cindy talked about redesigning business for women, and I'm wondering, have you guys, with your creative teams, are you aware of anything you're doing differently because it's a female-run department?
I mean, one thing I think we just bring a different perspective, because the majority of the creative department is guys. So, whatever we bring to the table is going to be wildly different than what the guys are going to bring.
It's a great question I hadn't thought about before. I think what if I look back, the people I hire, girls and guys, I think they feel like it's going to be okay, and they're not as freaked out on their first day because of their perception that women aren't assholes like men are. And so I think maybe it relaxes people because I'm in charge. That's what I feel if I think about it. I can be an asshole I can. If you're not performing, I'm not going to make you cry, but we're going to have a tough discussion. But I do think oh God, it's okay. It's a girl, cool. I think that's a difference.
I think what I bring, I don't even know how to answer this, to be honest with you. I never look at what people perceive with me, but I guess, I would just say I bring some humor and probably some openness and challenges to the situation. I don't think I can be super hard on people unless I'm really mad. But I do think people, they get a difference of opinion with me, and they get humor, and they get some kind of nuttiness from me. So I think that maybe is the thing that makes me different from the guys. I don't think any of the guys do some of the things I do.
So we could stay here all day, I'm sure. I mean, it's a rare treat for, I'm sure, you all to have an opportunity to ask questions, and fortunately there's a long day ahead, so you'll be able to speak to these ladies directly. I did a lot of research of my own in preparing for this, and asked 3 females that I work with in New York City. I didn't come to New York City because I thought it was the place to go, but I was from Savannah, Georgia, and there weren't any advertising agencies there, so it drove me to a different world. One of my colleagues in New York City, who is president and CEO of Medical Dynamics, one of the best PR minds that I know in the business, Charlotte Ray, said, "I sacrificed nothing, and I gained everything." Brett Chung, Sanford Chung, who was previous senior vice president and director of marketing for Smith Barney, I'm happy to say now a managing director at the Joey Company, said, with tears in her eyes, "I gave up friends." And Stacy Feldman, who's Director of Women's Health at Church and Dwight, and importantly, one of her brands is First Response Pregnancy Test, said, "The climb is not easy or fair, but it's worth it." All studies and research, and my strategic director and I spent a lot of time looking at them in preparation for today, say the single most important thing that we can do to help support the future success of women is to become women mentors to women. So, so I think it's, I think it's an internal thing that we need to think about who we're doing that for besides the people that work for us. Is there a way that we can network to women that don't have women around them so that you have a resource of, I need to check in about this. About kids. That is a big, big challenge for women, obviously. And many women navigate that in a lot of different ways. We are females and creative directors here, creative people here. And Charles Baudelaire has a great quote in tribute to the importance of being a mother. He said, "The genius of great creativity is a return to childhood." So, when you become a mother, if you become a mother and you are questioning this time that you are taking, remember what Charles said. Maybe you're just feeding yourself for the next section of your career. One last quote from Anne Marie Slaughter. "Women should think about the climb to leadership not in terms of a straight upward slope, but as irregular stair steps with periodic plateaus, even dips. I think of these as investment intervals." Thank you very much.